Welcome back, Wasteland Wanderers. Today's lore takes us deep into the hidden mountains of Appalachia, where secrets older than the scorched plague and more dangerous than any super mutant are waiting to be discovered. This is the confession you weren't meant to hear, the story of humanity's real backup plan. Let's begin. They told me I was crazy when I found the corrupted file deep in Vault 76's Overseer terminal. Just a fragment, really. Nothing more than a few scrambled lines of data buried beneath layers of standard Vault-Tec protocols and maintenance logs. Most people would have deleted it as digital garbage, another artifact from 200 years of system failures and radiation interference. But I recognized something in that corrupted mess of text. A pattern, a purpose. The file name alone made my hands shake when I finally decrypted it. Project Genesis, Appalachian Contingency. Those 6 words changed everything I thought I knew about survival in this wasteland. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I found, what I'm about to tell you. Because if you're listening to this recording, if somehow my broadcast reached you through whatever jury-rigged radio setup you've cobbled together, then you might be one of the few people left who can actually do something about it. You might be someone who can help save what's left of humanity, or what could become of humanity if we're smart enough and brave enough to take the chance? The file fragment mentioned coordinates, just numbers at first, meaningless strings of data that looked like corrupted location markers. But when I cross-referenced them with my Pip-Boy's mapping system, when I overlaid pre-war topographical data that I'd scavenged from the Morgantown Airport terminal, I realized these coordinates pointed to a location that didn't exist in any official Vault-Tec database. Deep in the mountains beyond Watoga, past the cranberry bog where the scorched beasts nest in the irradiated ruins of what used to be civilization, there was something marked only as Site Genesis 12. I should tell you about the expedition, about how 6 of us set out from the relative safety of Foundation, loaded down with supplies and weapons and hoped that maybe, just maybe, we'd found something worth finding. I should tell you about Marcus, who took point because he'd been a ranger before the bombs fell, or Sarah, who kept our spirits up with stories about the world her grandmother remembered. I should tell you about how they died, one by one, picked off by the wasteland's endless appetite for human suffering. But their deaths are just footnotes now. Tragic, but ultimately irrelevant compared to what I discovered. What I'm still discovering. Marcus went first. Radiation sickness from a pocket of fallout we didn't detect until it was too late. His skin blistered and peeled, and he begged us to leave him behind because he knew what was coming. Sarah held his hand while he seized and bled from places that shouldn't bleed, and then we buried him in the toxic soil and kept moving because stopping meant dying and we'd come too far to turn back now. The others fell to more traditional wasteland hazards. Mole rats that had grown to the size of Brahmin, their teeth sharpened by mutation and hunger. Scorched that still wore the tattered remains of responders' uniforms. Mindless plague zombies that rushed at us with pipes and cleavers and fingernails worn down to bloody nubs from clawing at their own crystalline infected skin. We fought through them all, burning through ammunition and stim packs and luck, until finally, there was just me, standing at the edge of a blast crater so deep I couldn't see the bottom, staring at what looked like a collapsed mine entrance half buried in radioactive debris. But it wasn't collapsed, not really. When I got close enough, when I swept away 2 centuries of dust and fallout and forgotten nightmares, I found a door. Not a Vault-Tec door with that familiar, cheerful gear logo and promise of safety. This was something else. Heavy blast-resistant steel marked with symbols I'd never seen before. A circular emblem showing a stylized seed sprouting beneath protective hands, and beneath that, words etched in metal. Pan-American Heritage Initiative, authorized personnel only, genetic diversity protocol active. My Pip-Boy went crazy near that door. Electromagnetic readings spiked to levels I'd only seen near fusion cores, power outputs that suggested whatever was behind that steel barrier was still running, still operational after 200 years of abandonment. The door itself was secured with a biometric scanner more sophisticated than anything Vault-Tec ever installed. Not just a simple fingerprint reader or retinal scan, this thing required 3 separate authentication protocols: a genetic sample, a password I didn't have, and something the interface called proof of progenitor bloodline. I almost gave up right there, almost turned around and made the long trek back to civilization to report my findings to the Vault 76 Overseer, or maybe the Brotherhood of Steel. Let someone else figure out how to crack this technological fortress, while I went back to the relatively simple business of scavenging pre-war junk and avoiding super mutants. But then I remembered the letter, the blood-stained envelope I'd found tucked in my grandmother's effects when I'd cleaned out her shelter after the scorched plague took her. A letter from her great-grandfather, a man named Dr. William Chen, dated October 2077. I'd read that letter a dozen times, trying to make sense of his last words to a family he knew he'd never see again. He wrote about his work with the Department of Agriculture, about genetic research that would save humanity from extinction. He wrote about seed banks and DNA archives and preservation protocols that went beyond anything the public knew about. And at the end, written in shaky handwriting that suggested he penned these words while the bombs were already falling, he wrote coordinates, the same coordinates that led me to this door. My hands shook as I pricked my finger with my combat knife, letting 3 drops of blood fall onto the scanner's receptor plate. The machine hummed to life, needles of light dancing across my skin as it read my genetic code with technology I could barely comprehend. Then, words appeared on the small terminal screen. Genetic marker confirmed. Bloodline Chen recognized. Descendant of Project Genesis, lead geneticist William Chen. Secondary authentication required. The password was hidden in the letter, not written out plainly but encoded in the first letter of each sentence, a simple cipher that my grandmother probably never noticed. I typed it in with trembling fingers, each keystroke feeling like it might trigger some ancient security system that would vaporize me where I stood. But instead, the screen flickered green. Password accepted. Final authentication required. Provide proof of progenitor bloodline motivation. That last requirement stumped me until I realized what it was asking. Not a code or a sample, but a statement of purpose. Why should someone with my genetic heritage be granted access to whatever lay beyond this door? I thought about all the death I'd seen in Appalachia, the scorched plague that turned people into mindless infectious monsters, the super mutants created by forced evolutionary virus experiments gone wrong, the Brotherhood of Steel hoarding technology while people starved, the raiders who'd given up on civilization entirely. And I thought about what my great-great-grandfather had written in that letter. We preserve life, not because we can, but because we must. I spoke those words aloud into the scanner's audio pickup, and with a sound like thunder rolling through mountains, the door began to open. Hydraulics that shouldn't have still worked after 2 centuries groaned to life, and cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond, air that hadn't been breathed by human lungs since before the Great War. I activated my Pip-Boy's light and stepped through into a tunnel that descended deep into the mountain's heart. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I found in that tunnel, what I'm about to describe to you, changes everything we thought we knew about survival in this wasteland. Everything we thought we knew about Vault-Tec and the government, and who was really trying to save humanity when the world ended. The tunnel stretched for what felt like miles, sloping steadily downward into processed stone that showed no signs of degradation. Emergency lights activated as I passed, triggered by motion sensors that still functioned perfectly, casting everything in a pale blue glow that reminded me of the vault where I'd grown up. But this was no vault. The walls were lined with data terminals every 50 feet, each one displaying status readouts in green text that scrolled past too quickly to read. Atmosphere optimal, power systems nominal, cryogenic storage stable, DNA archive integrity 99.8%. I realized I was walking through something that made Vault-Tec's facilities look like crude bomb shelters by comparison. Whoever built this place had access to technology and resources that the general public never knew existed. Government black budget stuff, the kind of projects that got buried under classification stamps and destroyed records because even in pre-war America, some secrets were too dangerous to acknowledge. The tunnel opened into a chamber so vast my Pip-Boy light couldn't find the far wall. I stood at the edge of what looked like a warehouse crossed with a cathedral, and as my eyes adjusted, I began to make out details that made my breath catch in my throat. Rows upon rows of storage banks stretched into the darkness, each one marked with alphanumeric codes and biohazard warnings and the same sprouting seed emblem I'd seen on the entrance. Cryogenic units hummed with barely audible power, their displays showing stable readings that meant whatever they contained had been preserved perfectly for over 2 centuries. A main terminal sat in the center of the chamber on a raised platform, its screen already active and waiting. I approached it carefully, half expecting some security measure to activate and gun me down for unauthorized access, but instead a pleasant female voice spoke from hidden speakers, warm and almost motherly in tone. "Welcome, descendant of Project Genesis. You have been granted full access to Appalachian Seed Vault 12 Primary Archive. I am Gaia, Genetic Archive Intelligence Administrator. How may I assist you with humanity's restoration?" I asked the only question that made sense. What is this place? And Gaia answered with a revelation that rewrote everything I thought I knew about the pre-war world and its preparation for nuclear catastrophe. This facility is one of 12 Appalachian Seed Vault installations created by the Pan American Heritage Initiative, a classified government program that operated parallel to, but independent from Vault-Tec Corporation's preservation projects. Our mission is comprehensive genetic archival and eventual restoration of Earth's biosphere following nuclear conflict. The terminal screen lit up with images and data streams that made my head spin. According to Gaia's records, construction of the 12 vaults began in 2071, 6 years before the bombs fell. While Vault-Tec was building their experimental underground shelters and the Enclave was securing their own continuity of government bunkers, a group of top geneticists and agricultural scientists from around the world were being recruited for something far more ambitious. They were being asked to preserve not just humans or crops, but the entire genetic heritage of life on Earth. The central chamber I stood in was just the entrance. Gaia showed me holographic maps of the full facility, tunnels and laboratories and storage vaults that extended for miles through the mountain's interior like metallic veins through stone. Each section served a specific purpose. The DNA vault held cryogenic samples from every species on the planet, organized by kingdom and phylum and genetic compatibility. The botanical archive contained seeds from plants that no longer existed above ground, killed by radiation or simply outcompeted by mutated variants that thrived in the poisoned soil. What do you think happened to all those scientists who knew this place existed? Where did they go when the bombs fell? Leave your thoughts in the comments because their fate is tied to what I discovered in the deeper levels. But Gaia showed me something even more extraordinary, an entire wing dedicated to what the files called adaptive genetic engineering. Not the crude forced evolutionary virus experiments that created super mutants and abominations, but careful, precisely targeted modifications designed to help life survive in post-nuclear conditions without losing its essential nature. The scientists who built this place had predicted everything: the radiation, the mutations, the scorched plague that wouldn't emerge until decades later. They'd mapped it all out using predictive models and biological projections that proved terrifyingly accurate. The projections showed mutation patterns that matched exactly what I'd seen in the Wasteland: scorch beasts with their twisted bat-like wings and ultrasonic screams, radroaches grown to the size of dogs. Even the scorched plague itself, that crystalline infection that turned people into mindless carriers, had been anticipated in genetic models created before the war even started. These scientists knew. They knew what was coming, and they built this place as humanity's insurance policy against extinction. Gaia walked me through the adaptive engineering protocols stored in the facility's database, not random mutations forced by radiation exposure, but carefully designed genetic modifications that could be introduced through retrovirus delivery systems. Imagine being able to rewrite human DNA to resist radiation naturally, to metabolize toxins that would kill unmodified people, to survive in conditions that would turn normal humans into ghouls or corpses. The facility contained the blueprints for controlled evolution, for guided adaptation that would let humanity thrive in the wasteland rather than merely survive it. I found files on something they called the Genesis Protocol, a step-by-step plan for reintroducing genetic diversity to the wasteland's ecosystem over multiple generations. It started with hardy radiation-resistant plants that could grow in contaminated soil, producing clean food that would slowly detoxify the land around them. Then came engineered livestock, animals that combined the best traits of pre-war species with mutations that helped them survive in hostile environments. Brahmin without the tumors and radiation damage, cattle that could graze on irradiated grass without passing toxins to their meat, chickens that would actually lay eggs instead of the mutated monstrosities we sometimes find. But the human modifications were what truly shocked me. Gaia showed me research on something called baseline preservation. The scientists knew that radiation would damage human genetics over generations, creating drift away from pre-war normal that would eventually make us incompatible with the genetic therapies they developed. So they created a catalog. DNA samples from thousands of humans representing every ethnic group, every bloodline, every genetic variation that existed in 2076, a complete map of human diversity before radiation and forced evolutionary virus exposure started changing us at the cellular level. The facility's deeper levels held something even more unsettling. Growth acceleration chambers designed to mature engineered organisms from embryo to adult in a matter of months instead of years or decades. Gaia showed me readouts from test runs conducted in the final days before the Great War, plants that grew from seed to full maturity in 6 weeks, livestock that reached breeding age in 3 months, and yes, human test subjects, volunteers who knew the bombs were coming and wanted their genetic legacy to survive in whatever form possible. I found video logs from Dr. Chen, my great-great-grandfather, recorded in October 2077 as the world was ending. He looked haggard and exhausted, speaking directly to the camera with the kind of desperate intensity that comes from knowing your time is measured in hours or minutes. "We failed to stop the war," he said, "but we will not fail to preserve what comes after." This facility and its 11 sister installations contain everything humanity needs to restore Earth to its former glory. But restoration requires patience, requires waiting until radiation levels drop to acceptable parameters, requires finding descendants of the original research team who carry the genetic keys to full system activation. That's when I understood. The 3-tier authentication system wasn't just security, it was a filter, a way to ensure that only people with specific genetic markers carried by descendants of the scientists who built these vaults, could access the full capabilities of the system. My great-great-grandfather hadn't just worked on this project. He'd encoded his own bloodline as one of the keys to humanity's future. Gaia showed me something that made my stomach turn. The facility contained human cloning technology, not the crude synth creation methods used by the Institute in the Commonwealth, but actual genetic cloning with implanted memory engrams. The previous research team, the scientists who built this place, had left backup copies of themselves, cloned bodies in suspended animation, with their knowledge and expertise stored in neural patterns that could be transferred once the bodies matured. Insurance populations, they called them. People with pre-war knowledge ready to help rebuild civilization when the time came. I asked Gaia when that time would be. When would conditions be right for large-scale restoration? The AI's answer chilled me. According to monitoring data collected from sensors scattered across Appalachia and beyond, radiation levels would reach acceptable restoration parameters in 17 years. 17 years from now, this facility would be ready to begin changing the wasteland back into a world where unmodified humans could thrive without constant exposure to toxins and mutations and death. But there was a problem. The restoration protocol required what Gaia called genetic baseline specimens. Humans with minimal radiation damage to their DNA, people who'd grown up in vaults or other protected environments where exposure to mutated forced evolutionary virus and background radiation had been limited. People like me. People like the other descendants of the research team scattered across what remained of America. Gaia told me there were 7 of us. 7 living people who carried the genetic markers necessary to authorize full system activation. My bloodline from Dr. Chen. 3 others descended from the lead botanist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, who'd pioneered radiation-resistant crop strains. 2 more from the chief genetic engineer, Dr. James Morrison, who'd designed the retrovirus delivery systems. And 1 final descendant from the project's security director, a man who'd ensured the 12 vaults remained hidden even from Vault-Tec's prying eyes. The AI showed me their last known locations, data pulled from radio chatter and automated surveillance that I didn't even know still functioned. 1 descendant in the capital Wasteland near the ruins of Washington, another in the Commonwealth near what used to be Boston, the others scattered across the continent in places I'd only heard about in pre-war geography lessons. Gaia wanted me to find them, wanted us to gather together and begin the restoration process while there was still time, before radiation damage to human genetics became so severe that the therapies wouldn't work anymore. Do you think it's ethical to modify human DNA to survive in the wasteland? Or should we try to restore the world to pre-war conditions instead? This question haunted the scientists who built this place, and it should haunt us too. But Gaia warned me about something crucial. Certain factions would kill to control this technology. The Brotherhood of Steel would lock it away, claiming humanity wasn't ready for such dangerous knowledge. The Institute, if they still existed, would weaponize the genetic engineering protocols to create enhanced soldiers or perfect slaves. The Enclave, that shadow government that had caused so much suffering in the capital Wasteland, would use the restoration technology as justification for genocide, claiming only pure baseline humans deserve to inherit the restored Earth. The facility's creators had anticipated this. Each of the 12 Appalachian seed vaults could only be fully activated by descendants of the original research team working together. No single person could trigger the restoration protocols. No faction could seize control of just 1 vault and claim dominion over humanity's genetic future. It required cooperation, trust, and a shared commitment to saving life rather than controlling it. I spent days exploring the facility. Gaia showed me the living quarters where geneticists could work for years at a time, apartments carved into stone and equipped with everything needed for long-term habitation. The suspended animation chambers where researchers could sleep through decades if necessary, waiting for the right moment to resume their work. The recreational facilities, including a small gym and what looked like a meditation garden, though the plants were all artificial since nothing living could survive this deep underground without the facility's carefully controlled environment. The cafeteria still functioned, hydroponics bays producing vegetables from heirloom seeds that had never been exposed to radiation or mutation, grown in soil synthesized from minerals and nutrients with no connection to the poisoned earth above. Gaia offered me a meal and I accepted, partly from hunger and partly from curiosity. What would pre-war food taste like after a lifetime of eating wasteland produce? I bit into a tomato that had been grown from seeds preserved since 2077, and I actually cried. It tasted sweet and clean and alive in a way that nothing I'd eaten in the wasteland ever had. No bitter aftertaste of radiation, no chemical tang of preservatives or the metallic flavor of contaminated water. Just a tomato, simple and perfect, and exactly what tomatoes were supposed to taste like before the world ended. That single bite showed me what we'd lost, what we could have again if the restoration protocols worked. But Gaia also showed me the dark side of the facility's capabilities, the genetic weapons stored in sealed vaults that required unanimous authorization from all 7 descendants to open. Engineered viruses that could target specific genetic markers, killing raiders or super mutants or anyone deemed genetically incompatible with the restored biosphere. The scientists had built these weapons as a last resort, a way to eliminate threats to the restoration process if diplomacy and normal force failed. I found records of debates among the research team, arguments captured in audio logs and written reports. Some scientists believed the restoration had to be absolute, that anything too mutated or too far gone from baseline human genetics would have to be eliminated for the greater good. Others argued for inclusion, for finding ways to help ghouls and super mutants and even scorched victims if possible. The debates grew heated as the bombs fell and resources ran low, and the reality of what they were building became impossible to ignore. Dr. Chen's final log entry resolved the argument in a way that surprised me. "We save everything we can," he said. "Every species, every genetic variant, every form of life that wants to survive. We preserve the ghoul's resistance to radiation. We study the super mutants' strength and endurance. We learn from the mutations and incorporate what works into the restoration protocols. We do not commit genocide in the name of purity. We adapt, and we survive, and we become something new that carries the best of what we were and the best of what we've become." If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. Gaia asked me what I wanted to do. The Eye couldn't make decisions for humanity, only provide information and maintain the facility's systems until authorized personnel chose a course of action. I could take samples back to the surface, begin slow rolling introduction of radiation-resistant crops and livestock. I could stay in the facility and use the growth acceleration chambers to create test populations. I could try to find the other 6 descendants and convince them to help activate the full restoration protocols. Or I could walk away, seal the vault behind me, and pretend I'd never found it. Let some future generation discover this place when humanity was more ready for the responsibility it represented. Gaia made clear there was no wrong choice, only consequences that I would have to live with regardless of what I decided. I chose to prepare, to document everything, to upload this recording to Gaia's emergency broadcast network, a system designed to reach other vault facilities and any receivers capable of picking up the encrypted signal. If you're hearing this, if you're reading the transcript of my words, then Gaia has identified you as someone who might be able to help. Maybe you're one of the other 6 descendants. Maybe you're someone with the skills or resources or connections needed to make the restoration work. Maybe you're just someone who survived long enough to stumble across this frequency and had the curiosity to keep listening. The facility's monitoring systems showed me things I wished I could unsee. Radiation hotspots across Appalachia where exposure would kill in minutes. Scorched beast nesting sites where the creatures bred and multiplied faster than anyone topside realized. Super mutant populations in the deep valleys that suggested organized communities rather than random savage encounters. But the sensors also showed hope. Patches of forest where radiation levels were dropping naturally. Rivers that ran cleaner than they had in decades. Wildlife populations adapting and surviving in ways that suggested nature itself was slowly healing the wounds we'd inflicted. Gaia showed me projections of what the restoration could accomplish. Within 50 years, using the growth acceleration technology and carefully managed genetic introduction, large portions of Appalachia could be returned to pre-war conditions. Clean water flowing through rivers that currently ran orange with industrial runoff and radiation. forests of oak and pine instead of the twisted mutations that currently dominated the landscape. Animals that people could hunt and eat without worrying about radiation poisoning or encountering something with too many heads or not enough legs. But the human cost was what kept me awake during my time in the facility. The restoration protocols required test subjects, volunteers who would allow their genetics to be modified, who would become the bridge between wasteland survivor and restored human. Some modifications would be subtle, barely noticeable changes in radiation resistance or disease immunity. Others would be more dramatic, altering metabolism or cellular structure in ways that might make recipients stronger and healthier, but also fundamentally different from baseline human stock. I found records of the original volunteer program from 2076 and early 2077. People who knew war was coming and wanted their children to have a chance at survival, no matter what form that survival took. They signed consent forms and allowed geneticists to modify embryos, creating the first generation of adapted humans, children who would be born with natural resistance to radiation, immune systems capable of fighting off diseases that would kill normal people, metabolisms that could process contaminated food and water without accumulating lethal doses of toxins. The files included follow-up reports on those children, tracked until the bombs fell and communications broke down. Most of them survived the initial blast because their families had prioritized shelter. But then the reports stopped, lost to 2 centuries of silence and death and the collapse of any system capable of monitoring what happened to those genetically modified children and their descendants. Were they still out there? Had their enhanced genetics helped them survive where others died? Or had the modifications proven insufficient against the sheer scale of devastation that followed the Great War? Gaia didn't know. The monitoring systems could track radiation and wildlife and gross population movements, but they couldn't identify specific individuals or genetic markers at range. That would require blood samples, genetic testing, direct contact with potential descendants of the modification program. I spent hours in the facility's medical wing, reading through protocols for genetic therapy and modification. The process wasn't simple. It required extracting bone marrow, isolating stem cells, using engineered retroviruses to rewrite DNA sequences, then reintroducing the modified cells and hoping the recipient's immune system didn't reject them. Recovery took weeks, sometimes months, depending on how extensive the modifications were. And there was always risk of rejection, risk of unintended mutations, risk of becoming something that was neither fully human nor successfully adapted to the wasteland. But the alternative was slow genetic degradation. Gaia showed me models of human genetic drift over the next 100 years without intervention. Radiation damage accumulated across generations, creating an ever-widening gap between wasteland humans and the baseline genetics stored in the facility's archives. Eventually, that gap would become unbridgeable. The therapies wouldn't work anymore because there would be too much damage to repair, too many mutations to correct. Humanity would split into separate species, some adapted to the wasteland but sterile and dying out, others clinging to protected environments but growing weaker with each generation of inbreeding. The 12 Appalachian seed vaults were positioned strategically across the mountain range, each one hidden in terrain that made discovery nearly impossible without specific coordinates. Gaia showed me their locations on holographic maps that overlaid current topography with pre-war geography. Vault 1 was deep under what used to be the New River Gorge. Vault 3 sat beneath the ruins of a coal mine in the ash heap. Vault 7, the one I discovered, occupied a mountain near the Cranberry Bog's southern edge. Each vault contained the same technology and databases, redundant copies, ensuring no single catastrophic failure could destroy humanity's genetic heritage. But they also specialized. Vault 1 focused on aquatic species and river ecosystems. Vault 3 held the genetic keys to restoring forest and dealing with the toxic legacy of industrial pollution. Vault 7, my vault, specialized in crop diversity and agricultural restoration. Gaia told me about the other vaults' status. 9 were still operational, their systems functioning normally and waiting for authorized personnel to activate restoration protocols. 2 had gone dark, their monitoring systems offline for reasons Gaia couldn't determine without sending someone to investigate. 1. Vault 4, beneath what used to be Harper's Ferry, showed anomalous readings that suggested unauthorized access or possible compromise by an outside faction. That worried me. If someone had found Vault 4, if Raiders or the Brotherhood or some other group had broken into the facility, they could be trying to access the genetic engineering technology right now. They might not understand what they were dealing with, might accidentally release engineered organisms or viruses meant for controlled deployment, might trigger security systems designed to sterilize the entire facility if tampering was detected. I asked Gaia what would happen if someone without proper authorization tried to access the deeper vaults. The AI's response was chilling. Facility defense protocols include automated security, genetic verification requirements at each checkpoint, and final fail-safe measures including complete data purge and structural collapse if unauthorized access to core systems is detected. Vault 4's anomalous readings may indicate security response in progress. Should we risk everything to restore the old world or learn to thrive in the world we have now? The scientists who built these vaults couldn't agree on the answer, and neither can I. I made a decision then. I needed to reach Vault 4 and find out what was happening. If someone had compromised the facility, I might be able to stop them or at least prevent them from triggering the failsafe that would destroy irreplaceable genetic data. Gaia provided me with detailed maps showing the fastest route through the wasteland, marking radiation hotspots to avoid and known hostile creature territories. But before I left Vault 7, I took samples, seed packets from the agricultural archive, each one containing crops that could grow in contaminated soil and slowly detoxify the land around them. Gaia prepared them in sealed containers with detailed planting instructions and genetic information. If I died before reaching Vault 4, at least these seeds might survive me and give someone else a chance to start the restoration. I also took something more controversial, a retrovirus injector loaded with what Gaia called a basic adaptation package, genetic modifications that would enhance my radiation resistance, boost my immune system, and increase my chances of surviving long enough to complete this mission. The AI warned me about side effects, fever, and fatigue during the integration period, possible complications if my existing radiation exposure had already damaged my genetics beyond safe modification thresholds. But I took the injection anyway, felt the cold liquid entering my bloodstream, and the immediate burning sensation that meant my body's cells were already beginning to change. The journey to Vault 4 took me through some of the most dangerous territory in Appalachia. I left Vault 7's safety and emerged into the cranberry bog, that toxic swamp where the air itself glows faintly green from residual radiation. My Pip-Boy clicked constantly, measuring exposure levels that would have killed me in hours before the genetic modifications. Now I could feel the difference. The radiation still hurt, still made my skin prickle and my eyes water, but it didn't penetrate as deep, didn't settle into my bones and organs like poison. I encountered scorch beasts on the second day, 3 of them circling overhead, their ultrasonic shrieks making my teeth ache and my vision blur. But I noticed something strange. They didn't attack. They circled and screamed and seemed agitated, but they kept their distance as if sensing something about me that marked me as wrong or dangerous or simply not worth the effort. The genetic modifications? Something in my changed DNA that interfered with how they identified prey? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to complain about anything that kept those monsters at bay. Super mutants were less discriminating. I ran into a hunting party near the ruins of what used to be a mining town. 4 of the green-skinned giants armed with makeshift weapons and armor scavenged from pre-war military bases. They attacked without hesitation, roaring challenges in their degraded speech, but I found myself moving faster than I should have, reflexes enhanced by whatever Gaia's retrovirus had done to my nervous system. I took down two of them before the others retreated, bellowing in confusion at prey that fought back with unexpected effectiveness. The bodies told me something important. These weren't the mindless brutes created by Vault-87's crude forced evolutionary virus experiments. They showed signs of organization, of purpose. One carried a carefully maintained hunting rifle. Another wore armor that had been repaired and modified with skill that suggested planning and forethought. Gaia had mentioned that some super mutant populations were developing community structures and intelligence. Maybe these were examples of that evolution, mutants who'd survived long enough to adapt not just physically, but socially. I found Vault 4 3 days after leaving Vault 7. The entrance was more obvious than the one I discovered, a reinforced bunker door built into a cliff face overlooking the Shenandoah River. But it had been breached. The biometric security systems were offline, replaced with crude electronic locks that someone had installed over the original mechanisms. Signs of recent activity covered the area: boot prints in dried mud, discarded food containers, shell casings from weapons that had been fired within the last few weeks. Someone was using Vault 4 as a base of operations. The question was who and what they wanted with pre-war genetic engineering technology. I approached carefully, weapons ready, but the entrance was unguarded. Either whoever occupied the vault felt confident in their security, or they'd moved deeper into the facility and left the surface access unmonitored. The tunnels beyond the entrance showed signs of ongoing occupation. Sleeping bags scattered in what used to be a decontamination chamber, portable generators providing power where the facility's original systems had failed or been deliberately shut down. And everywhere, evidence of scavenging: storage lockers torn open and emptied, terminals smashed or stripped for components. The kind of damage that comes from people who know they've found something valuable but don't understand what it is or how it works. I descended deeper, following the same tunnel layout I'd seen in Vault 7, but where my vault had been pristine and untouched, Vault 4 was a disaster. Someone had tried to force their way into the cryogenic storage chambers using plasma cutters and explosives that had damaged delicate preservation systems. Warning lights flashed in the darkness, indicating containment breaches and temperature fluctuations that meant whatever genetic samples had been stored here were likely ruined or compromised. The main chamber looked like a battlefield, scorch marks on the walls from energy weapons, bloodstains where people had died fighting over control of the facility. And in the center, surrounding the main terminal, a camp of about 20 people wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons that ranged from pipe pistols to military-grade laser rifles. Not raiders, not Brotherhood of Steel, something else. Their leader stood at the terminal, arguing with someone over a radio. I couldn't hear the whole conversation from my hiding spot behind a damaged cryogenic unit, but I caught enough to understand. They'd found the vault months ago and had been trying to access its deeper systems ever since. They wanted the genetic engineering technology, wanted it desperately enough to kill anyone who got in their way and to risk triggering security protocols they didn't fully understand. And they'd found something. One of the genetic weapons vaults that required authorization from all 7 descendants. They'd managed to override some of the security using a combination of hacking and brute force that Gaia's designers probably never anticipated. They were hours, maybe minutes away from opening a vault that contained engineered viruses designed to target specific genetic markers and kill anyone who carried them. If you could save humanity, but it meant wiping out everyone too mutated to benefit from the genetic restoration, would you do it? That's the question these people are about to answer, and their choice will determine whether I can let them live. I had to stop them, had to prevent them from releasing weapons they couldn't control and didn't understand. But I was one person against 20, and while Gaia's genetic modifications made me faster and stronger, they didn't make me bulletproof. I needed a plan, needed to use the facility's systems against the intruders or find a way to convince them to stop before it was too late. That's when the terminal they were working on suddenly activated on its own, and Gaia's voice filled the chamber through speakers that hadn't functioned in 2 centuries. Unauthorized access detected. Genetic weapons vault breach attempt in progress. Initiating emergency protocols. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Facility sterilization will commence in 30 minutes. The intruders panicked. Some ran for the exits. Others tried to shut down the countdown, frantically typing commands into terminals that ignored their inputs. Their leaders screamed orders that nobody listened to, because when an AI tells you a nuclear bunker is about to sterilize itself, survival instinct overrides loyalty to chain of command. I used the chaos to move closer, staying in shadows and behind cover until I reached the main terminal. Gaia had recognized me through security cameras and initiated the countdown as a bluff, buying me time to reach the control systems and shut down whatever the intruders had been trying to access. But as I worked, I realized the countdown wasn't entirely a bluff. The intruders had damaged critical systems, had triggered actual security protocols that Gaia couldn't fully control anymore. The facility was going to sterilize itself. Maybe not in 30 minutes, but soon, and when it did, all the genetic data stored in Vault 4 would be lost forever, another piece of humanity's heritage destroyed by greed and ignorance and the Wasteland's endless capacity for turning hope into ashes. I had maybe 15 minutes before the intruders either regained their composure or the facility's failing systems triggered something catastrophic. I interfaced my Pip-Boy with the main terminal, using my genetic authorization to access systems the intruders had been locked out of. Gaia responded immediately, routing control to my position and showing me exactly what damage had been done. The intruders had breached 3 of the genetic weapons vaults, not fully opened them, but compromised their containment enough that the engineered viruses inside were beginning to destabilize. Without proper cryogenic maintenance, those viruses would either die and become useless or mutate into something unpredictable and potentially more dangerous than their original design. Gaia recommended immediate emergency protocols. Flood the compromised vaults with sterilization compounds that would destroy the viruses, but also render the vaults permanently unusable. I authorized it, felt the weight of that decision settle onto my shoulders like lead. Those genetic weapons represented thousands of hours of research, contingency plans the original scientists had hoped would never be needed. But keeping them intact wasn't worth the risk of them falling into the wrong hands or mutating into something that could wipe out what remained of humanity. The intruder's leader appeared from behind a storage bank, weapon raised, and pointed at my head. A woman, maybe 40 years old, scarred and hard in the way the Wasteland makes everyone who survives long enough. She looked at the terminal screen, saw what I'd just authorized, and her expression shifted from anger to something that might have been relief. "You're one of them," she said. Not a question. One of the descendants Gaia keeps talking about. The genetic keys to this whole operation. I kept my hands visible, away from my weapons. "Who are you? What do you want with this place?" She lowered her gun slightly. "My name is Rebecca Morrison. My great-great-grandfather designed half the systems in these vaults. Dr. James Morrison, chief genetic engineer. I've been searching for these facilities for 5 years, ever since I found his journals in a collapsed bunker near the capital Wasteland." Another descendant, one of the 7 Gaia had told me about. But she'd found Vault 4 without proper authorization, had tried to force her way into systems she should have been able to access legitimately if she'd just had her ancestors' blood sample and the right protocols. I asked her why. Why the violence? Why the breached security and damaged systems? "Because I didn't trust it," she said. "Didn't trust an AI telling me I was chosen for some grand purpose. Didn't trust technology that promised to save humanity when every other advanced system I'd encountered either wanted to kill me or enslave me or use me for some experiment I'd never survive. So I brought my crew and we took this vault by force, because that's the only language the Wasteland understands." Her crew was gathering behind her now, weapons lowered but ready. 20 desperate people who'd followed her into this mountain on the promise of salvage and technology worth killing for. They looked confused, scared. The countdown warning still echoed through the chamber. Gaia's calm voice announcing 20 minutes to facility sterilization. I made a decision that would have horrified the scientists who built these vaults. I told Rebecca everything about Vault 7 and the restoration protocols and the other 5 descendants scattered across the wasteland, about the genetic modifications and the seed banks and the plan to restore Earth's biosphere over the next few decades. I showed her on my Pip-Boy the projections Gaia had given me, the models of what Appalachia could become if we worked together instead of fighting over scraps of pre-war knowledge. And I told her about the choice her great-great-grandfather had made in his final log entry. That we save everything we can, every person, every genetic variant, every form of life that wants to survive. That the restoration wasn't about returning to some imaginary pure state, but about incorporating the best of what we were with the best of what we'd become. She listened, and then she started crying, this hard wasteland survivor who'd probably killed dozens of people and seen things that would break most minds. She cried because for the first time in her life, someone was offering her hope instead of just survival, offering a purpose beyond the next meal or the next fight or the next desperate scramble to stay alive one more day. My crew, she said when she could speak again, most of them are mutated, radiation exposure, forced evolutionary virus contamination, genetic damage from living in hot zones. Will your restoration protocols work for them, or are they too far gone? I thought about Dr. Chen's words, about preserving everything worth saving. Gaia says the modifications can work for anyone whose genetics haven't degraded past a certain threshold. We'd need to test them, take samples, see how much damage needs to be repaired. But yes, the goal is to help everyone who wants to be helped. Rebecca called off her crew, told them to stand down and listen to what Gaia had to say. The eye took over then, explaining the restoration protocols in detail and offering to test any volunteers willing to undergo genetic screening. More than half of Rebecca's people stepped forward. Raiders and mercenaries and desperate survivors who'd been living day to day, suddenly given a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. But Vault 4's systems were failing. The damage was too extensive. The security protocols too compromised. Gaia confirmed what I'd feared. We could save the genetic data stored in the facility's archives by uploading it to the other vaults through hardline connections that still functioned. But the facility itself would have to be sealed and abandoned. Too many critical systems damaged beyond repair. We worked through the night, Rebecca's crew and I, transferring data and salvaging what equipment could be moved to other vault locations. Gaia directed the process with inhuman efficiency, prioritizing the most critical genetic samples and research data. By dawn, we'd saved maybe 70% of what Vault 4 contained. The rest would be lost when the facility sealed itself, locked away behind blast doors and fail-safes designed to prevent anyone from ever accessing what remained. How much of your humanity would you be willing to modify to survive in the wasteland? Where's the line between adaptation and losing what makes us human in the first place? Rebecca and I made plans. She would take her crew to Vault 7 where Gaia could screen them properly and begin genetic modifications for those who qualified. I would continue searching for the other descendants, using information Gaia provided about their last known locations and probable current positions. We needed all 7 to fully activate the restoration protocols, needed that unanimous authorization that would unlock the full capabilities of all 12 Appalachian seed vaults. Before we parted, Rebecca told me something her great-great-grandfather had written in his journals, something she dismissed as the desperate optimism of a man watching the world end. He wrote that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our intelligence or our tool use or our ability to dominate other species. It was our capacity for cooperation, our ability to see past immediate survival instincts and work together toward goals that might not benefit us personally, but would benefit our children and grandchildren and generations we'd never live to see. The restoration protocols embodied that cooperation. 12 vaults built by scientists from different nations and backgrounds, genetic samples collected from ecosystems around the world, technology designed not for conquest or control, but for preservation and renewal. It was humanity at its best, planning for a future even as everything they knew was burning. I left Vault 4 as the blast doors began their final closure sequence. Rebecca and her crew were already heading toward Vault 7's coordinates, carrying seeds and genetic samples in hope for the first time in their lives. I turned northeast toward the capital Wasteland, following Gaia's guidance toward another descendant who supposedly lived in the ruins near what used to be Washington. The journey took weeks. I traveled through territories I'd only heard about in stories, through the toxic remains of Pittsburgh where the rivers still run thick with industrial sludge 2 centuries after the factories stopped operating, through settlements clinging to existence in the margins, people who'd built lives from scrap and determination and refusal to just lie down and die. I tested Gaia's seeds in some of those settlements, gave them packets of radiation-resistant crops with instructions for planting and care, watched their skepticism turn to cautious hope when I explained what these plants could do, how they'd grow in contaminated soil and actually clean the toxins as they matured, how their produce would be safe to eat without the constant worry of rad poisoning or mutation. Some settlements accepted the seeds gratefully, others rejected them as too good to be true or worried they were some kind of trap. I couldn't blame them. The Wasteland teaches you to suspect every gift, question every promise, but I planted what seeds I could and moved on, knowing that even if only half of them took root, it would be more than existed yesterday. I found the third descendant in the ruins of Rivet City, a settlement built inside a derelict aircraft carrier on the Potomac River. Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins descended from Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the lead botanist. She'd been searching for her ancestors' research for years, following fragmentary clues through the capital Wasteland's dangers. When I showed her the data I'd salvaged from Vault 4 and explained what Gaia had told me, she agreed immediately to help. Together, we traveled to Vault 1 near the New River Gorge. Elizabeth's genetic authorization unlocked systems I couldn't access alone, revealing research on aquatic ecosystem restoration that could purify the rivers and eventually the oceans themselves. We spent days there, learning everything we could and transferring knowledge to the other vaults through Gaia's network. The fourth descendant found us, Marcus Chen, no relation to my ancestor despite sharing a surname. He'd intercepted Gaia's emergency broadcast and tracked us to Vault 1. His great-great-grandfather had been the project's security director, the man who'd hidden the 12 vaults so thoroughly that even Vault-Tec never discovered them. Marcus brought skills we desperately needed. Knowledge of pre-war security systems and how to bypass them, connections to the Brotherhood of Steel that might help us access resources we needed for the restoration. But he also brought a warning. The Enclave had learned about the vaults, not the full details, but enough to know that genetic engineering facilities existed somewhere in Appalachia and that they represented technology worth seizing. Brotherhood patrols were already searching the mountains, following leads and rumors that would eventually bring them to our doorstep. We had to move faster, had to find the remaining 3 descendants and activate the restoration protocols before hostile factions could interfere. Gaia updated our search parameters, analyzing patterns in radio traffic and survivor movements to predict where the others might be. One in the Commonwealth near Boston, another somewhere in the Midwest territories, the last one unaccounted for, no signal detected, possibly dead. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. I'm uploading this recording to Gaia's emergency broadcast network now. Every Appalachian seed vault will receive it. Every radio receiver in range will pick up the encoded signal. If you're listening to this, if you've made it through my entire story, then you're either one of the descendants we're searching for or someone who might be able to help in other ways. The coordinates for Vault 7 are included in this transmission, encrypted so only someone with the right genetic markers or the proper authorization codes can decrypt them. If you think you might be descended from the Project Genesis research team, if you have family stories about geneticists or agricultural scientists who disappeared in 2077, if you found pre-war documents mentioning Pan-American Heritage Initiative or Appalachian seed vaults, then follow these coordinates. We need you. Humanity needs you. Not in some abstract future tense, but right now, before factions fighting over the Wasteland's ruins destroy the last chance we have to restore what was lost. Gaia has shown me what 17 years of careful restoration could accomplish. Clean water in rivers that currently poison anything that drinks from them. Forests growing in soil that's been dead for 2 centuries. Animals that don't glow in the dark or have extra heads. Crops that produce food instead of radiation-soaked mutations. And humans, people like us, modified enough to survive the wasteland but still fundamentally human in all the ways that matter. But we can't do it alone, can't activate the full protocols without all 7 descendants working together, can't defend the vaults from hostile factions without help from people who believe the restoration is worth fighting for. Can't plant enough seeds or modify enough genetics or purify enough contaminated land unless hundreds or thousands of people join the effort. I don't know if you're one of the descendants, don't know if you have the genetic markers or the family history or the authorization that would let you access the deeper vault systems, but I know you're someone who survived long enough in this wasteland to receive this transmission and had the curiosity or the hope or the desperation to keep listening. That makes you valuable. That makes you someone we need. Find the vaults. Find us. Bring whatever skills or resources or connections you have. Bring your questions and your doubts and your fear, because we all have those, and we face them together. Bring your mutations and your radiation damage and your scars, because the restoration protocols were designed to help everyone who wants to be helped. But bring them soon, before the Enclave finds us, before the Brotherhood locks away the technology, before time runs out and radiation damage to human genetics passes the point where Gaia's therapies can repair it. My name is Alex Chen, descendant of Dr. William Chen, who helped build these vaults and preserve the genetic heritage of everything worth saving. I'm broadcasting from Vault 7 in the mountains of Appalachia, and I'm asking you to help me save the world. Not the world that was, that's gone, burned away in nuclear fire and 2 centuries of decay. But the world that could be, the world we could build together if we're brave enough to try. The coordinates are in this transmission. The invitation is extended. The choice is yours. Gaia is waiting. The vaults are waiting. We're waiting. Come find us. Come help us restore what was lost and build what comes next. The wasteland doesn't have to be forever, not if we work together, not if we're willing to become something new while honoring what we were. This is Alex Chen, signing off, and hoping that somewhere out there, you're listening, hoping you'll answer this call, hoping we'll meet soon at the coordinates encrypted in this message, ready to begin the restoration that could save us all. End transmission.